Fire has always held a certain power over the human imagination. It can light up the night, warm the coldest bodies, and cook the food that sustains us. But it can also destroy. It can rage uncontrollably, leaving behind nothing but ashes. For most of us, fire is a tool to be respected. For a select few, however, it becomes an obsession. It becomes an unyielding force that draws them in, an irresistible call that they cannot ignore. These individuals are pyromaniacs, people whose compulsion to start fires grows into something much darker. The mind of a pyromaniac is a labyrinth of contradictions. On the surface, they may appear just like anyone else. But underneath, there is a driving force that is impossible to explain, a craving, a compulsion to watch something burn. Fire becomes more than a tool to them. It becomes an escape, a rush, a source of power. The term pyromania is used to describe a person with a pathological urge to start fires. But understanding the mind of a pyromaniac goes beyond simply labeling it as a mental disorder. The reasons behind their actions are deeply rooted in both psychological and emotional needs. For some, the desire to set fires comes from a place of control. The act of starting a fire allows them to wield power over their environment, something that may be lacking in other areas of their lives. It's a way to reclaim control when everything else feels out of reach. When they light a match, they feel a sense of dominance. The fire doesn't just burn, it responds to them. It obeys them. For others, fire is a way to escape from their reality. The rush of adrenaline, the heat, the chaos. All of these elements create a distraction, a brief escape from whatever turmoil they may be experiencing. It's not about destruction or harm. For some, it's simply about feeling something, feeling alive, feeling in control, feeling like they can leave their pain behind, even if just for a moment. There's a fascinating complexity to the relationship pyromaniacs have with fire. It's not always about malice. Sometimes it's not even about destruction. Sometimes it's about the act itself. It's about the thrill of starting something that cannot be stopped. It's about watching the flames grow, seeing the fire spread, knowing that they set it in motion. One of the most infamous pyromaniacs in history is Raymond Lee Stewart, a man whose fascination with fire led to a series of devastating arson attacks across the United States in the 1980s. For Stewart, fire was not just a passion, it was an obsession. He spent years perfecting the art of starting fires, honing his skills until they were nearly undetectable. His motivations were complex. In interviews later in life, Stewart admitted that it wasn't about the destruction, it was about the chaos that fire could create. It was about watching the world around him shift and change, the world he could influence with nothing but a match. But as with most pyromaniacs, the fire soon became a path of destruction. Stewart's fires led to millions of dollars in damage, countless lives disrupted, and many lives lost. His story isn't unique. Many pyromaniacs share similar stories, an early fascination with fire, a growing obsession, and ultimately, a loss of control. In some ways, pyromania can be seen as a cry for help. It's a mental health issue, a way to cope with anxiety, trauma, or an inability to deal with the world around them. The act of setting a fire releases a flood of emotions. For some, it is the only way to express feelings they cannot articulate. For others, it is the only way to regain a sense of control when everything else feels chaotic. But there's a darker side to pyromania that cannot be ignored. It's the potential for harm. When someone starts a fire, they are not just putting themselves at risk, they are putting the lives of others in danger. In the case of arsonists, the fires they set don't just destroy property. They can claim lives, leave families homeless, and leave entire communities in ruins. What drives someone to this point? What is it that makes fire so irresistible to certain individuals? The answer lies in the psychology of fire itself. Fire is not just a physical phenomenon, it's an emotional one. It represents both creation and destruction. It symbolizes life and death. The act of starting a fire taps into the deepest parts of the human psyche, the need for control, the desire for power, the craving for escape. But it's not just the thrill of the flames that drives pyromaniacs, it's also the aftermath. The destruction they leave behind, the chaos, the confusion, the fear, feeds into their need for validation. For many pyromaniacs, the act of setting the fire isn't enough. It's the aftermath that satisfies them. It's the news reports, the public attention, the fear that follows. And yet, despite the devastating consequences, pyromania is often misunderstood. It's easy to demonize those who commit arson or start fires for thrill, but what is often overlooked is the deep-rooted emotional and psychological distress that fuels these actions. To truly understand the mind of a pyromaniac, we must look deeper at their need for control, their need for release, and their internal struggle with the world around them. While we've explored the thrilling, dangerous, and often chaotic motivations behind pyromania, we must also address the deep emotional and psychological toll it takes on the individual. To truly understand the mind of a pyromaniac, we need to go beyond the flames themselves and look at the emotional struggles that feed this dangerous obsession. For many pyromaniacs, fire represents more than just an adrenaline rush. It becomes an escape from internal turmoil. It is often deeply tied to unresolved trauma, feelings of inadequacy, or overwhelming stress. The act of setting a fire allows them to control their environment in a world that might otherwise feel uncontrollable. The fire becomes a symbol of their inner rage, their pain, and their desire to feel powerful. Jack, a former pyromaniac, describes the moment he realized he was drawn to fire. It wasn't about the destruction at first. It was about what fire made me feel, powerful, alive, in control. For a long time, I felt like I couldn't control anything in my life, but when I lit that match, everything changed. Jack had grown up in a household filled with emotional abuse. His father, a strict and unforgiving man, created an environment where Jack felt constantly trapped. The isolation and emotional scars from his upbringing left him with a deep sense of frustration and anger. For years, Jack struggled to express these emotions in healthy ways. When he first started setting small fires in secluded areas, he found an outlet for the chaos inside him. "I felt like I had the power to make things happen," Jack recalls. "I'd set a fire, and for those few moments, I was in control of something. I could watch it spread. I could watch it grow. It was like I finally had control over my life." But the more Jack relied on fire to cope with his feelings, the more destructive it became. What began as an isolated act of rebellion soon escalated. He started setting fires in abandoned buildings, watching as they consumed everything in their path. With each fire, Jack's need for control deepened, and so did the danger. The rush of starting the fire was no longer enough. He needed the fear, the chaos, the aftermath. And it wasn't long before his fires started attracting attention. In time, Jack was caught. The consequences of his actions were devastating, not just for the communities he impacted, but for himself as well. He was sentenced to years of probation and ordered to attend therapy to address the underlying issues driving his pyromania. But the process of confronting his past wasn't easy. Therapy helped Jack understand that his obsession with fire was a way to deal with emotions he had never been taught to manage. As he worked through his trauma, he came to terms with his need for control and the emotional emptiness that drove him to find solace in the flames. "I had to learn to face the emotions I'd been running from for years," Jack says. "Fire gave me an outlet for everything I didn't know how to express. But when I looked back, I saw the damage it caused, not just to others, but to me." Jack's story is just one example of how pyromania is often tied to emotional distress and unresolved trauma. It's a complex condition that involves much more than a simple desire to watch things burn. For many pyromaniacs, it's a manifestation of deep psychological wounds, unmet needs, and a desperate attempt to regain control in a world that feels chaotic and unpredictable. The psychological effects of pyromania are long-lasting. Even after the fires are extinguished and the legal consequences are faced, the emotional scars remain. Survivors of pyromania, both the pyromaniacs themselves and the communities affected by their actions, must navigate the aftermath of trauma. The guilt, shame, and fear left behind often take years to heal, but healing is possible. The journey to recovery for many pyromaniacs begins with the realization that their actions were driven by a deep need for control, power, and emotional release. Through therapy, support groups, and reflection, they can begin to understand the root causes of their compulsion and develop healthier coping mechanisms. It's not an easy process, and it often involves confronting difficult emotions, but it is the first step toward breaking free from the grip of fire. For some, the path to recovery involves finding new outlets for their feelings. Physical activity, artistic expression, and volunteering are just a few ways that people who once turned to fire can now channel their energy in a positive direction. In Jack's case, he began volunteering with local fire departments, using his experience to educate others about the dangers of fire and the importance of fire safety. The more I gave back, the more I felt like I was gaining control over my life, Jack says. I realized I could use my past to help others avoid making the same mistakes. And that felt like a true form of redemption. For pyromaniacs who have faced their demons and come out the other side, recovery isn't just about stopping destructive behavior. It's about reclaiming their sense of self and finding new ways to live with their emotions, not through them. As we examine the mind of a pyromaniac, it's important to remember that fire isn't just about destruction. It's about the complex emotional and psychological forces at play. Fire is the symbol of our deepest fears, our greatest desires, and our hidden pain. For some, it becomes a reflection of everything they've been running from. But for those who confront it, fire can also be a symbol of healing, growth, and transformation.